Hi again, Mark here from talkingbass.net. This week I was going to try to put forward a good sample practice routine for you to check out, but in planning out the lesson I suddenly realised that I've never actually found practice routines to be really useful apart from in really specific circumstances. So instead I'm just going to give you a few tips on how to go about practicing in general and why structured practice routines don't always necessarily work. Now, if you've been playing for a while, you've probably seen quite a few examples of practice routines. Some of them are crazy long and involve covering every part of playing. Steve Vai had an infamous 10-hour practice routine that incorporated hours of technical drills, scales, chords, and blah blah blah. Now, it obviously worked for Steve, and I'm sure thousands of other musicians have benefited from a really rigid practice schedule each day. But I do have a few criticisms of this way of practicing, mainly because I've tried loads of different routines, creating them myself, and I've always given up on them after a while without even realising it. I tend to compare practice routines to dieting plans. You can make up a great schedule covering a bunch of different playing areas, but over time, entropy always seems to play its part, and that ordered state of practice steadily starts to fall apart. And even if you're really good at keeping the structure of the schedule intact, eventually something in your life is going to get in the way, and it only takes a few misses of the routine to kind of lose sight of it entirely. It's not so bad if you're at music college and everything in your day revolves around improving your musicianship. But ironically, it's at those times in your life when the rigid schedule is actually not as important because you end up doing so much studying every day anyway. But even if you can stick to a strict schedule of practice, one of my main criticisms is concerning the actual practice material. A lot of these routines don't take the progressive nature of musical education into account. Let's take a basic major scale as an example. Here I'll play a good old C major scale. Now let's just say that I'm going to concentrate on that particular fingering pattern for a few weeks, even though it shouldn't really take that long to nail. Once you've got that scale under your fingers, that's it. You've got it. You can practice it over and over again from every tonic available until you can play really, really fast. But that wouldn't take very long, and then you'll be just going over the same material. You need to move on to something new. The world of music is massive, and you could practice every minute of the day for several lifetimes and still have fresh things to study and new sounds to discover. I once read an interview with Stanley Clarke where he said that you should always practice things that you can't play. What's the point of practicing something that you can already do? And that's always stuck with me. Once you learn something like a scale, you take it apart, play it every way that you can, be creative with it, and then just put it in your mental musical toolbox ready to apply in your playing, and just move on to something new, even if it's a different fingering pattern or, whatever. I don't see the point of running up and down that scale every day in some schedule in the hope that, you're either going to set a world record for the world's fastest one-octave major scale or as a precaution against forgetting it somehow. If you have a practice routine, it's got to be dynamic and evolving, otherwise you're just playing the same stuff over and over again. Now, this might sound like I've got something against practicing your instrument, and that's the absolute opposite of what I'm suggesting. I think you should practice as much as you possibly can, given the lifestyle that you've got. If you work every day from 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 and have kids, then every minute that you practice is going to be precious. And I don't think it really helps that you see these 10-hour practice routines that sort of give the impression that you need to practice that amount to, really excel as a musician. At the end of the day, there's two really important points that you need to realise that override every other bit of advice. One is that 10 minutes of quality practice is worth 24 hours of pointless practice. So it's very much a case of quality over quantity. And two is that you should study music first and bass second. Those two go very much hand in hand, because if you've got a mindset of practicing music rather than bass, then you'll be getting that quality practice. I had a few experiences during my years at music college that demonstrate this perfectly. For the first few years of playing, I spent a lot of time practicing the physical side of playing. I basically wanted to be the next Billy Sheehan, and I made myself all these practice routines that involved long warm-ups with loads of finger permutation exercises that I practiced for about an hour, building up speed to a metronome. And then I'd try playing through a bunch of songs. I'd start out slow, and then I'd gradually build up in speed, until I was doing loads of high-speed finger picking with tap-in licks and slap-in licks thrown in for good measure. And as time went by, I began to reach all the goals that I wanted to reach. So I became what I thought was some kind of rock-based virtuoso. Of course, I was completely deluded, like, a few young players that you might even see on YouTube sometimes. I could physically play all the things that I wanted to play, but little did I know that all the things that I'd set out to play occupied such a small part of the whole bass playing universe. I couldn't sight read, I couldn't improvise walking bass lines, I had no repertoire at all other than the rock songs that I'd been learning. I'd got limited experience of different musical styles. My theory and harmony knowledge was, pretty much non-existent. And as for more advanced jazz improv, I couldn't improvise a solo through any sort of changes. My idea of soloing involved playing Billy Sheehan tap licks up and down the neck. Also, my gigging and band experience was limited to the odd local bar gigs, so I had very poor bandsmanship, and that's something that I consider completely separate from musicianship, because the ability to operate within a group of musicians on and off stage involves a very specific, very different and very important set of skills. So anyway, I started my time at music college and almost immediately realised how much I didn't know. And this is where the tip of learning music over bass comes into play. I can't even begin to count the number of lessons or lectures that I've had over the years when I've suddenly had one of those moments where, everything just seems to make sense. Most of the time it happens when learning some little nugget of theory that fits a bunch of other little nuggets of theory together, and all of a sudden you see everything from this fresh new perspective. Now, this kind of learning is so much more important or rewarding than practicing technical drills, because gaining true knowledge like that is going to stay with you all your life and shape the way that you play and see music in general. Practicing a bunch of physical drills in isolation might help in the short term, but take a year out and your hands will lose all that peak performance. You can easily regain that speed and dexterity, but the true knowledge is going to remain. The fantastic New York bass player Will Lee once wrote a column for Bass Player magazine explaining how taking some time out from practice can really help with gaining some perspective and seeing things from fresh eyes and ears. The main thing that I took from the column was when he said that don't be scared of losing a few weeks practice. The groove ain't going nowhere, and he's right. So first of all, you need to look at your daily lifestyle and be really honest about the time you have available for practice. If you're a student or unemployed, then you're obviously going to have more time available in the day than someone with 3 kids and that works 2 jobs. In those cases, you have to be really efficient with your time, and the quality practice that I mentioned earlier becomes even more important. So try looking at the week in the same way that you might plan a weekly or monthly budget. You can make a written plan of an average week and then look at each day individually and be really, really honest with yourself. You've got to be careful with this, because if you've got children or a wife or a husband or pretty much any person that demands a certain amount of responsibility, then you're probably going to have to work around them. You don't want a bass guitar to be creating stressful interpersonal relationships, because that's just going to screw up any attempts that you have at practicing. It needs to be seen in the same way that you'd set time aside for meditation or yoga or something like that. You need a quiet time, free of stress, even if it's only for 20 minutes. Of course, if you've got no responsibilities, no job, no kids, then you've really got no excuses. If you have problems motivating yourself to practice, then just set aside an hour at the same time each day and make a weekly list of the areas that you need to work on. Then work through them and stick to it. If you find yourself getting carried away with practice, then that's great, but at least you'll have pushed yourself to make the time. So once you've found some time, you've got to then look at what you should practice. Now, rather than set out a routine of specific exercises, it's much easier to look at broader areas of study. Most practice routines begin with a warm-up. Now, I get why people do this, because if you're going to let rip with a bunch of speedy licks, then you want your hands to be all fired up and ready, and you don't want to be causing yourself injury. So the warm-ups often involve some hand stretchers and finger exercises away from the instrument, and then a bunch of mindless calisthenic finger permutation exercises like this. Now, I've got a slightly different outlook on this. First of all, it's going to depend on the time of day and the weather. For instance, if you've just woke up and your metabolism still hasn't kicked in and your hands feel all weak and fragile, then you need to generally get moving around first. Have some breakfast, walk around, normal activity. Now, if you've done that, or it's a little later in the day, then the next thing to think about is the temperature. Are you physically cold? Have you been outside in the snow? Is it a boiling hot summer's day? Is it raining and your hands are wet? If your hands are freezing cold, then again, you need to warm up, literally. Don't just pick up your bass and start trying to play Jacko lines. It's not going to do you any good. One thing I tend to do if my hands are freezing cold is run a bowl of warm water and just soak the hands. Or just run them under a warm tap. Not too hot, obviously, but warm enough to just literally warm them up. Soak your wrists too and massage the hands at the same time. Next up, just get your hands working by just opening and closing the fingers like this. Okay? Try about 3 sets of 20 and hopefully your hands will feel a little more ready. So once your hands are a little more ready for action, you shouldn't really have to sit there playing through all these mindless exercises to warm your hands up on the instrument itself. But by the same token, you don't also want to, just go ripping into the hardest stuff that you want to play. So start off by just playing some bass lines. Play along to your favourite songs or whatever, but just make sure that it's some fairly easy stuff. And that's all the warm-up that you should really need. Also, if there's a particularly difficult lick or line that you want to practice, one fairly decent tip is to actually just play that line slowly. There's all these fancy warm-ups that you see online and in books that are supposed to prepare you for the harder bits of practice, but the best way to warm up for something is to just use those tendons and muscles that you'll need for that particular thing, but slowly and lightly. I say this because, you could spend an hour warming up the hand doing a lot of finger-picking drills and then end up practicing slap lines. And, the muscles and tendons that are going to be used for that are going to be completely different. So, as an example, let's say that I'm going to be practicing a bass line that moves around quite a lot, like this. Okay, so I don't really want to be going straight into that cold, okay? So I could just play it round and round slowly, like this. And if that was even too fast, take it even slower. Okay, just round and round. And that way I'm actually warming up the tendons and the action that I'm going to be using later on a lot faster. Now, if you've got plenty of time to spare and can practice for several hours in a day, then I'd recommend splitting that time up into several different areas. If you've only got 20 minutes to an hour each day or every couple of days, then you want to focus more on your weakest points or just split those areas up over several different days. I generally look at practice in the following areas. 1, reading. 2, songs and repertoire. 3, ear training and transcription. 4, improvisation and creativity. And 5, applied harmony or theory. Now, each of those areas covers and cross-references many other sub-areas. And a good practice session or quality practice session is really going to incorporate all of them. Now, before I begin looking at each of these areas in detail, it's worth mentioning that an absolute beginner is going to have a very different set of practice priorities to an advanced pro that's been playing for 30 years or more. If you're a complete beginner, then I'd say the main priority is to just get your hands working on the instrument, playing your favourite tunes and just really enjoying yourself. During those first few months of playing, it can be really easy to lose interest simply because it either seems boring or too difficult. Handing a strict minute-by-minute practice routine involving scales, arpeggios and sight reading to a complete beginner is likely to result in, eyes rolling followed by a tut and a huff and an eBay sale of one, Squire Fender Precision bass. So for a beginner, play as much as you possibly can and try to practice everything, but make sure to concentrate on just learning the songs that you love and having fun. Either work them out by ear or find tabs for them and just try to enjoy yourself while your hands develop. I'd also say that as a beginner, it really pays to have one-on-one live private tuition. Not Skype, even though I am a big advocate of Skype lessons. I mean an actual hands-on live tutor in the room with you, even if only for a few weeks or months. This will really save time and help you, ironing out any physical problems that you might have at first, and help guide you in the right way. It's also worth mentioning that advanced players are going to have a different practice routine to developing intermediates. The practice areas that I'm going to be going through are mainly for developing players in that broad intermediate range, and that's pretty much covers the majority of players out there looking for guidance, because as I said, advanced professional players will know exactly what they need to work on and will have a very fine-tuned approach. Once you've got a good grounding in most areas of playing and theory, you don't need to keep going over them in the same way. You might need the occasional refresher on a certain area for certain gigs or something that you're going to be doing, but most pros can spend a lot of each day dealing with the current gig or job that is music practice in itself. So let's have a little closer look at these different practice areas. First of all, we've got reading. Now, if you can't read music at all, then you can make a start today. And even if it's only 10 minutes a day, you'll see massive improvements in a matter of weeks. I won't waste time going into all the ins and outs of, how learning to read can improve your playing. Needless to say that it will completely change your playing in ways that you don't even realise yet. And it'll open the doors to some great gigs as well, and the option of becoming a full-time professional musician if that ever appeals to you. I'll be releasing an e-course devoted to sight reading very soon, so if you don't know where to get started with reading music, then hopefully that'll be of some use to you. Also, as a related topic, I also class reading of chord charts under this same area of reading. Any translation of music from the written page to an instrument is useful, and it all helps in getting to know the neck a little better. So find as many different chord charts and lead sheets as you can and try playing through them on your own or along with the recorded version of the song or piece. And that'll also help in the next area of songs and repertoire. So songs and repertoire is exactly what it sounds like, just learning songs. Learn as many songs in as many styles as you can. As a beginner, this is the best practice that you can do, and as you progress, you'll just move on to more diverse or tougher material. This also crosses over into reading and ear training, all depending on how you learn the tune, because you're either going to be working it out yourself or using a written form to help you, whether that's standard notation, a lead sheet, or even tab. I also include the repertoire label because having a strong knowledge of a lot of songs in different styles can really help with certain gigs, and is actually one of the most useful skills to have. I've written a whole article on developing repertoire over at talkingbass.net, so I'll just advise you to check that out. Learning many songs in a wide variety of styles also obviously helps you strengthen your general bass playing, and you get to learn all the little idiosyncrasies that go in creating the particular feels and sounds. You'll start to become an all-round bass player rather than a rock player or a pop player or a jazz player. And again, this area crosses over into other areas like applied harmony, because certain styles like jazz or blues with walking bass demands a knowledge of scales and arpeggios. Next up is ear training and transcription. Now, I don't necessarily mean doing a daily routine of solfa sight singing drills, even though that would be a great idea. Just practice learning songs by ear, playing along to the songs on the radio or TV or CDs, and other bass related things that can help your ear develop. I'll shortly be doing a lesson on some great little tips on ear training, so you can check those out. But as I say, just listen to songs that you like and then work them out. Also work out melodies, solos, chords, and anything that catches your ear. You can also try singing your bass lines as you play them, or sing a line and then try to work it out on bass. This all helps to link up your internal and external musical voices. The next area is improvisation and creativity. Now, this is also related to ear training, transcription, and applied theory like scales and chord tones. The creativity side of things is obviously just straight ahead making stuff up, writing bass lines, songs, licks, and whatever you feel. Also, when I say improvisation, I don't just mean jazz or blues soloing like many people instantly assume. This can also be basic bass lines, so you can take a chord chart and try improvising a bass line in whatever style. This can be pop or soul or jazz or rock or reggae or whatever. If you've been practicing your chord tones and scales, then this is the perfect way of applying that knowledge in a practical sense. Walking bass lines are one of the best ways to practice this, and apps like iRealBook are great tools for practice. Just find a standard like Autumn Leaves or All the Things You Are, set the track running and practice walking lines through the changes. Now, I've got a series of lessons devoted to walking bass lines coming up, but if you need any help in the meantime, then Scott Devine has a great couple of videos dedicated to this topic. So check those out. You can also use apps like iRealBook for practicing and improvising solos. So if you need to practice your jazz playing, then walking lines and solos should definitely be a part of your practice. Lastly, applied harmony or theory covers all the obvious practice stuff like scales and chord tones or arpeggios, but it also covers anything that you're likely to cover in theory or harmony studies, but all applied to the bass neck. So I've already released a series of videos that you may have seen on music theory for bass. That's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. It's important to avoid just playing a series of scales or arpeggios for no reason. You should learn how they're constructed and why you need to learn them. So in learning arpeggios or chord tones, you should learn the theory behind the chord construction. That allows you to then learn them in a very systemized way. And then you can learn how to apply them to your playing. So that way, instead of just learning arpeggios as a bunch of technical exercises as a way of playing really fast across the neck like some guitarists do, you'll actually understand how music is created from these nuts and bolts, and it'll become much easier to analyse and compose and improvise and develop your ear. So they're the areas that I'd look to practice. If you have lots of time on your hands and the motivation, then you can create a practice routine devoting an equal amount of time to each of these areas. And like I said, it has to be dynamic. You should constantly push forward and change the material that you practice. If you feel like the material's becoming stale and too easy, move on to something new. You can always go back to previous material if you need a refresher. If you don't have much time on your hands, try covering one particular area each day. If you've got 20 minutes in a day, try one thing, like a bit of sight reading practice, or learn one particular song or improvise through a certain tune. Hopefully each of these areas will integrate nicely with the others. For instance, just attempting to practice a walking line through a song that you've never played before can incorporate reading, because you're reading through a chord chart or a lead sheet. Ear training, because you get to work through a new chord progression and weave a line through it, which is ultimately guided by your ear. You obviously get to fulfill the improvisation area because you're improvising a walking line. And you also get to fulfill the songs and repertoire element because you get to learn a new song. And then finally, you get to incorporate the applied harmony area because you're using scales and arpeggios in creating the line all over the neck. So this is one of the many reasons that many bass teachers concentrate on learning jazz, because improvisation in this way is a great way of improving so many areas of your playing without having to approach all these things in isolation. Scales and chord tones become ingrained in your head because you're using them naturally in your playing. Now, you may be wondering why I've not included technique in this set of practice areas. Well, that's mainly because your technique should be something that you're aware of and perfecting while you're practicing all this other stuff. It's an ongoing process. The one thing I would say regarding technique practice is that you do actually need to spend some time concentrating on it at the start. So when you first start playing, you obviously need some guidance and practicing the basics of, holding the instrument, plucking the strings, and all the intricacies that go with that. But with a good teacher and a good few months of practice ironing, out all the bad habits, you should be well versed in how it all works. Then your practice can move on to the main areas that I've mentioned. There's no real need for technical exercises. Songs or pieces are the best ways to develop your technique because you're actually applying it with purpose. The other flip side is being creative with it and, doing your own thing, which again is covered in the improv and creativity area. You have application and reason given to the actual technique that you're wanting to apply. As for all the other stuff like slapping, tapping, harmonics, strumming, 3 and 4 finger picking and all the other extra techniques that you can work on, just treat that in the same way. Spend some time getting the basics of the technique under your fingers and then move into application as quick as you can. The basic concept of slapping with the thumb and popping with the fingers can be learned fairly quickly. The real development comes from learning songs or instrumentals and grooving or soloing. Again, that involves both the areas of repertoire and creativity. No need to sit there just going over the same mindless technical exercises, like this. Get stuck into learning some grooves and applying the technique. Harmonics are the same. It's easy to learn a harmonic, easy peasy. But then you need to go into messing around with them, writing stuff and learning pieces, like Portrait of Tracy by Jaco Pastorius. Application is the key. For some people, technique is often equated with speed. And so those people might be thinking, why are there no speed building exercises? Well, technique is not speed. Fast playing can require good technique, or at least an approach to your technique that's conducive with fast playing. But learning to play fast is just the same as learning something slow, but a decent amount of technique coupled with familiarity and practice will eventually lead to you playing it quicker just as a natural consequence. You have to ask questions of yourself such as, what is it that I'm trying to play quickly? So as an example, I could sit and show you a lick like this and tell you to practice it faster and faster in order to build up your finger speed. But that's a very specific and actually very simple line. Play a different pattern like this and the muscles are all going to be completely different. Okay, and then something else. Okay, and you've got to start the process of building speed all over again. Yes, there's a certain element of finger fitness that you develop over time, but as I said before, that comes naturally as you practice all the other stuff like bass lines, scales and arpeggios with good technique. Spending any amount of time on some kind of speed building in isolation is almost pointless unless the material that you're practicing is useful to you. I also don't include any overstretching finger exercises in any of the routine, again, partly because it's kind of pointless. There's a few little exercises that you can do when you start out or have any specific problem areas, but to be honest, playing an F major scale down here at the first fret is a stretch in itself and a hell of a lot more useful than a mindless exercise. You get other licks like this, famous one from Jaco, that require a big stretch. But what's the point in learning a mindless exercise to learn that lick? You might as well just learn the lick, and practice that lick. At least you'll have something that you wanted to play at the end of it. Now, as daft as this sounds, I'm not completely against mindless technical exercises. I know quite a lot of them and I've used some of them in the past. And I've even got some video lessons devoted to some finger strength exercises that are as mindless as they come. Remember, my goal here is to help you make efficient use of practice time and develop a quality over quantity mindset. Finger exercises can be something to fill up the extra time, but if you're really dead serious about practice and want to make the highest quality use of that time, then practice something worth practicing, and that'll benefit your overall long-term musicianship. Okay, so hopefully that should give you some practice ideas and possibly a different perspective on how to approach practice. Please like this video and subscribe if you want any updates on weekly lessons. Also check out talkingbass.net for a whole lesson map and more articles and downloads. You can subscribe to receive the free scale ebook reference guide, and if you're interested in Skype lessons, then just drop me a line. Okay, see you later.